How can mindfulness support us in the age of Donald Trump? And before we move into the topic, maybe you'd like to follow your in and your out breath so that you train your mindfulness muscle to stay present. So first, let's clarify what is it that we actually do in mindfulness. One of the main points of mindfulness is recognizing your current inner state. And just through acknowledgement, you create a little bit of distance from this inner state, from your identifications. To be identified in meditation practice means that you believe a particular thought, a particular inner perspective to be true. For example, you may be identified with the thought, I am not good enough. Or you could also be identified with the thought, speaking of Donald Trump, I am better than everyone else. When you identify with the perspective, you become one with it. You coalesce with it. This becomes the point of view from which you see yourself and you look out onto the world. So once you are identified, this perspective will inevitably evoke certain emotions in you. And then you will act on those emotions. Now, this is important. The more strongly you are identified, the stronger your emotions will become. The stronger the emotion, the more extreme the actions. If you would kill someone, if you would start a war, or if you would commit suicide, then the identification with your inner perspective must be extremely strong. It is like a formula. The more identified, the stronger your emotions. The stronger the emotion, the more extreme your actions. And the better you understand this process and your mind, the less you run the risk of merging completely into identification. Because one way mindfulness can help us in the age of Donald Trump is by not becoming like him, is by preventing us from having the same inner states he does. Let's just start there. It may be hard to believe, but you could experience the same mental states that Donald Trump displays. Identification doesn't only happen to Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin. Insanity is universal. And the better you become at observing your inner state, the less likely you are to identify with and then act on them. But mindfulness doesn't only help us recognize our own inner states. It also helps us to recognize these states in others. So now let's dissect the three inner states of Donald Trump that are visible to observe. And the most obvious one is hubris. Now, hubris is a Greek word and means presumption. And in ancient time, it was used to describe people who placed themselves on a par with the gods. A person who is identified with hubris is constantly fighting to show the world and themselves that they are superior. Sound familiar? And the reason they move into a state of hubris is because they are so afraid of feeling inferior. This state can feel like a drug because being admired, experiencing success, experiencing power are like a shot of heroin. And this helps to no longer feel inferior or powerless. But like any drug, it is not sustainable. And it creates long-term suffering for oneself, but also for others. So the second inner state that Trump is often identified with is greed. And greed and hubris often go together. Having a lot of things can also create the illusion of grandeur. If I possess valuable things, then I must be valuable myself. And what is the greatest possession? To own an entire country. This explains why Putin wants to own Ukraine and Trump wants Greenland or Canada to become his property. And both men want to amass as much money as possible, not because they will ever spend it, but because of having it gives them the sense of control, of power, of superiority. Again, through hubris and greed, we try to control our feelings of inferiority and powerlessness. And finally, the third mental state that Donald Trump often displays is denial. I can't list all of his lies and distortion of reality, but they are quite well documented. When you are in a state of denial, you refuse to acknowledge reality. People enter this state because they are afraid that if others truly see them, they will be judged. And as with hubris and greed, the greatest fear here is being perceived as inferior or weak. So you must create a reality in which this could never happen. What does it mean for us? The better we understand our own inner states and those of others, the less likely we are to vote for people who display these inner states. And we also don't support companies whose owner exhibits such states. Our observation will help us not to give power to people who can't distance themselves from their inner states, because we know they will endanger our world in the long run. This is the most important work of our time. If we do not learn how to manage our inner states of consciousness, our emotions, our anger, greed, and fear, then we will cause suffering in ourselves, in our family, community, and society. Emotions are political.